Hello, friends. Welcome back to the School of Self Worth. So, do you spend more time than you would like to admit thinking about your body and how you would like it to look? Have you ever wondered why you care so much about your body's appearance? I know that I have, and I am so excited to share a powerful conversation today with Amy Lang, a master health coach and host of the Happy and Healthy with Amy podcast. Known as the habit whisperer, she helps chronic dieters free themselves from diet culture to create deep health and to rediscover joyful eating. Prepare yourself for a powerful, deep discussion on the impact of diet culture on people of all backgrounds. And if you're a high achieving career woman who wants to use the self worth system to rewire internal programming, preventing self worth, DM me worthy at Nicole Song on Instagram. Okay, let's get into this powerful conversation. Well, hi, Amy. I'm so glad to have you here on School of Self Worth. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this, what I think is going to be a great conversation.
I am too. We were chatting a little bit about this. So, around where does self esteem and self worth come in, and particularly around diet and diet culture, because that's your area. And
Yeah.
so, I'm actually just really curious to hear. I always like to start with people's own stories and journeys of self worth because I feel like by the time you arrive at a place where we're talking about it, there has definitely been some kind of journey. There's definitely been an experience where you've had to look at the places where you weren't really considering yourself worthy of whatever it might be, and then had to get to a point where you had to move through some portion or of that journey and that experience. So I'm curious if you could actually even start by telling us yours.
Well, I think you probably know, like the journeys. We always talk about there was a one pivotal moment, but it's
Mhm.
really more like a series of pivotal moments that occur. So I think way back, I mean, if we were going to start with where the original story came from that kind of led to the struggle, it really starts with when I was growing up. I mean, I remember when I was about 14 years old, my mom talked about how her waist was only 22 inches when she graduated from college. So the whole concept of like what it meant to be thin, like how thin, how
Mhm.
tiny, and that was like the end all be all. I also remember right around the same time, I was watching a TV show, The Dukes of Hazzard. I don't know if you remember that one. And it was Catherine Bach who plays Daisy Duke. Uh, she, I don't know, whatever episode it was, she appeared on the screen, and my dad sort of declares like she has the perfect figure.
It's like so random, right?
I'm like, where did that come from? But for my 14-year-old brain, I I took that to mean like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to aim for. This is important. And when you talk about self-worth, that sense of like being enough, like that
Mhm.
somehow I got it in my head that that's what it required. And so I think growing up, there was a lot of that whole wanting the love and approval. Like approval got intertwined with that as opposed to separate, right? So, in my thoughts these days, I make a separation. Like love is about who you are, approval is about what you do. That was a very important thing. When did I actually learn that? Um, that took a while. So, I mean, I went from that message to I went into financial services and high tech. And at that point, I was in the wrong job. I had gained like 15 pounds in 6 months. I was so bored. I was eating chocolate covered raisins all the time. And I hired a personal trainer at that point. And I got fitter and I got stronger and I lost the weight and my body composition was a nice 22%, which is healthy and strong.
Mhm.
Um, and I had a trainer ask me, when was the last time you were happy with your body? And I couldn't think of one.
Mm.
That it really was kind of like the fact that I couldn't think of one. I was like, there's work to be done. I need to figure this out because I can't go the whole of my life. Like, that seems like such a waste to be in that state. And so I think it was working with a different trainer who was also a life coach. We really unpacked that and really explored like what is the difference and how do I separate, the size and shape of my body with like my sense of self-worth so that I could take action from a different place. So when I coach clients these days, I always talk about self-care habits, not diets, not weight loss programs, but self-care habits. And when I say self-care, I'm really talking about coming from this place of like love, acceptance. You're good enough already and you're worth taking care of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I have so many thoughts about this because I relate to that early childhood experience, and like I don't know what your background is, but I'm Chinese American and my mom also like being very thin is like very valued in that
Mhm.
culture too. And I remember my mom telling me about how she could like how tiny she was when she got married and then the dress and like I would never be able I don't think in my entire life I've ever fit into her wedding dress, like maybe when I was in 8th grade, like a really long time ago. And so when you said that I was like, oh, that reminds me of that dress. And I never even would ever dare like try on that dress because there's no way. And even culturally interesting, like my relatives, I have relatives in Taiwan, and like, when I would have muscle, they'd like pinch my arm and be like, "Oh my gosh, it's so much, it's so cute," because it's like so much to like, grab. So, anyways, when you were speaking to that, I was like, "Oh my gosh, those kinds of there's like that family culture of diet culture, right?" But then there's also, or really not even culture, diet culture, but messages
Yeah.
around your value is related to what you look like, and then you add in, you know depending whatever era people listening to grew up in, you could have been part of the snack wells revolution. You could have been part of the like super exercise, super thin. Like there's so many different things that have layered in. And I'm so curious when you talk about that, when you started to understand that there was like a culture trying to impose, or the ideas was it in that coaching imposing on you this idea of thinness means valuable, thinness means I am somehow going to be accepted in this world in a different way.
Yeah. Well, so I'm actually also Chinese American.
Mhm.
My dad is actually originally from mainland China. My mom's from Taiwan. My dad fled to Taiwan when the communist revolution took place. I don't know. His dad brought him. Long story short, so a lot of those messages, yeah, that it we I think we're very similar in that sense with the messages that we grew up with. I owned a health club for 15 plus years in San Francisco. So, um, all the messages around, again, sort of what the body is supposed to look like. And we used to have a sandwich board in front of the club that said birthday suits tailored here. And and I'm like, I'm not trying to body shame. I mean, it's very much like if you want to lose weight, if you want to get stronger and fit, or like if you want to change that, we're here to help. But I never put a value judgment in it other
Mm,
than I do value health. So, to the extent that we can do things to help you get healthier, that's truly my mission. And I don't care what your body looks like at the end of the day. I
mhm,
really don't. I'm always like, if I could unzip you and look at you on the inside, how are you doing? I was always talking about that. So, as far as when I became aware of the language, I actually was when I went through the training to become an intuitive eating counselor, that's when they started to sort of unpack like this is what the media and the messages are saying. What's the underlying assumption, belief that you have not examined, you have not challenged, you've accepted and internalized as true? Like, this is the way it is. Um, and when I did that, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm believing all of this stuff. I've internalized it. And now I'm also rebelling against it.
mm.
It was really interesting. And I am not an intuitive eating counselor, by the way. I went through their whole program. I could be, except part of it is they still want folks to be angry with diet culture. And from that place, I believe we're giving our power away. Because at some level, to be angry means that you still accept what they're saying is true. Like somewhere in there, right? We internalize we're both the victim and the persecutor. And I'm like, I don't need that. I don't need that. You can believe that, but that doesn't mean like I can't recognize that that's your opinion. And it could be a shared opinion, but I don't have to agree with you.
Well, I want to pause because actually what you're saying is so powerful that like being angry at it is actually giving away your power. Because I think a lot of people think of that as powerful, and it is not actually, because it's like saying that you still have some sway over me. Like
Hmm.
your opinion and your thought of how I exist is still creating this very emotional reaction
Yeah,
versus being like, oh yeah, diet culture exists and I don't have to subscribe to it.
yeah, yeah.
Like a really calm, even way of thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think of two things. One, I remember seeing a post on Instagram by one of the founders of intuitive eating, and she had written, uh, the scale is a tool of diet culture oppression, tool
Mm.
of the oppressor. And I'm like, no, really, the scale is just a scale. Why are you giving this inanimate object power over how you feel about yourself? That to me was just I was like, how do I respond to this? So, yeah, so I think that's really the biggest reason why I decided like I don't want to go down this particular path.
Mm.
So now I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think intuitive eating in terms of the self-care eating framework that it provides is actually very, very helpful, is powerful. So I don't like, like let's just make sure that we're very clear on those distinctions. So, yeah, so one is sort of how you think about a scale and what standing on it and seeing a number might do. The other, when I talk about angry, I think the best example I can think of is like after you break up. If you're in a relationship and you've gone through a breakup, and if that person, every time you see that person, if you get triggered, how is that helpful? Like, actually, what you want to do is come to a place where you're at peace with it, right? Where, I mean, depending on the nature of the breakup, at some level, you would like to be grateful that you had the experience, that you learned from it, wish them the best, right? Like that's that's coming from a place of calm,
Mhm.
and that's where the power. That's where you get to decide how you want to focus your energy and attention.
That's a beautiful analogy, and I'm curious when you say that, you're like, "Okay, grateful, and, like, I learned my lessons." Then how do you apply that to a relationship with your own body? Because I feel like, especially for women, but men, I feel like this is also true, are often at war with their bodies, they're very much trying to control it, and then maybe and I feel like the people who listen to this podcast have evolved past probably the worst part of the war, and yet still at some level, there's this, like I don't like how I look in the mirror, or like these pants are tighter than I want them to be. Like how do you start to address those? Like it's really baked in, for all of us. And so how do you start to disentangle it and have a different relationship with it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the biggest I think the biggest challenge is that the one of acceptance. And who is it? There's a psychologist, Carl Jung, I think, talked about like once you accept it, that's when it can change. And I'm misquoting him, but it's you can look it up. And um, so when we talk about these thoughts, for me, it is really actually the process of just noticing it, sitting with it, and then there's this, asking for questions. Is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Because if we talk about treating ourselves with love, how are you speaking to yourself? So even, let's say, even if you look at your body and you're like, okay, I know that I can be better than this. Like, I want to improve. There's nothing wrong with that. I actually think like this is where your body is now. I would actually say if you're wearing clothes that are uncomfortable, then if you're kind of giving yourself this reason to beat yourself up. Like it's a constant reminder, I want to be smaller than I am right now.
Mm.
as opposed to like, you know, you get to choose what clothes you wear. Wear stuff that helps you feel good, right? That is comfortable, that allows you to show up as your best and take care of yourself, and let the results, that outcome that you seek, be like the byproduct of what you're doing. So this is why I'm always talking about, let's focus on habits. Let's talk about coming from this place of self-love in terms of what we're doing. And just like happiness, right? It becomes a byproduct of what we're doing, as opposed to getting so attached to the outcome that because there's also the flaw in that idea of like, once I get there, then I'll be happy. When I
Mhm.
lose the weight, then I'll be happy. Well, okay, if that's what you're telling yourself, let me ask you, are you saying you can't be happy unless you lose the weight? Is that the world that you want to create for yourself, that reality? Because I don't think that that serves us. I don't think, how do you want to live your day? And that thought, if that's the undercurrent, if that's the unexamined thought, we want to examine it. And can we find another way to say it, or different way to think about it, that actually empowers us? So that's where it's like, I can take one small step today to move me closer to that goal of being, and really it's in the powers in the reframing, but there's a lot of acceptance work that has to go with it. Like, this is where you are now, and can you be grateful for what you have now, that your body
Mhm.
is taking care of you?
Yeah, and so it's interesting because I'm hearing you say that like a lot of it is self-acceptance and then loving yourself as you are, and you're also saying then it's okay to still say, "I would still like to lose 10 pounds."
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and, like, do you ever get into then what would be the purpose of that? Like, why would we care about that part? If we're, like, in that loving place for ourselves? Because this is where I think a lot of conflict lies for people around this. It's like, "Well, I'm trying to accept myself. I gained some weight. I'm trying to accept it, and I still don't wanna be this way." Like, how like, that feels sometimes to me like this, you're just, like, trapped in both.
Oh, well, I guess this would probably be the whole alignment and integrity sort of conversation, where if we talk about what we truly value, so if you value health, if you value taking the best care of yourself, just like you would a child, right? A loved one, what would you be doing? And are you keeping your word? So, keeping your word with yourself, I think the source of the conflict actually comes from there. It's
Mhm.
not so much about the weight. I think it becomes like this is the kind of person that I envision myself being. That somehow I also believe that that version of me would be better than what I am now,
Mm.
right? And so, is that true, right? Is it a kind way to, like, those are the things where it's like, okay, well, how can you talk about it a little differently so that you're coming from a place of compassion, where I remember in my 20s I had some people tell me, like, you got to learn how to be your own best friend. How would you encourage yourself? How would you support yourself? And yeah, so take action. Take action to I think the mindset of growth is really important. I
Mm.
think, we want to keep learning, we want to keep growing, we want to keep becoming better than, because we have that ability. I think in even from a coaching perspective, it's like, I want to become a better and better coach, because I think then I can help people better. I can help more people. There's nothing wrong with that process,
Mhm.
right? So if you think that, well, if I were to lose 10 pounds, that somehow I would be better. I guess I would think, in better in what way? Like, how are you measuring that? What does that really mean to you? And
Mm.
if you can come up with something where it really is an empowering way to think about it, then I think it will inform you as to what actions you take as a result of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it's good. It's like we're digging in deeper always into, like, what is the mentality behind it. Well, we were originally talking about too, you and I, about self-esteem versus self-worth in this whole journey around body image and like how you see yourself. And I'm curious about how you make the distinction for yourself. It's like what I was hearing when you were talking is I am worthy of like having this thing as long as it's something that's an empowering thing for me. And then how do you feel like that? Because to me, that is distinct from self-esteem, like having a strong sense of self-esteem. So how do you think about the two pieces of that when it comes to like your journey with your body and your own body image?
So, self-worth to me is about your your internal sense of being good enough.
Mhm,
It's this I have intrinsic value just as I am. And the way I can connect with that is, and this is what's helped me, it's helped a lot of folks, is think about like when a baby is born, right? They're loved, they're perfect just the way they are. They're helpless. And what is the instinct to take care of them? And to that there it is that sense of like you're perfect just the way you are. The world is a better place because you were born today. Like how does that make you feel when you hear those words? What does that mean? Right? And if you can get that's the self-worth piece. Self-esteem, I think, is about seeing yourself do things um, and do them quote successfully, right? Getting the outcome that you want. That's about self-efficacy in a lot of ways. So I think self-esteem is tied more to achievement, to accomplishment in that sense. But if you believe that your worth is tied to what you accomplish, this is where I think it gets really, really fraught with peril, right? Because now you're confusing who you are with what you do. We don't
mhm.
want to do that. We don't want to conflate those two things. Because if you think in those terms, then if you believe you have, say, control over the size and shape of your body to the point where you were talking about, like as a personal trainer, I look at the human body and well, I was in Tokyo and Japan, right? The women are really tiny as well. And I remember going there and looking at these women and I'm like, I want to put some muscle on you. Like a good stiff wind is going to blow you over. So in my mind, I was like, okay, if that's what my mom thought was the ideal, I can at least know that's not what I want to look like. If that's what she said after I was born, she got down to 95 pounds. She's 5'2". And even her physician was like, You're underweight. I want you to gain some weight here." But she was very happy that she was that tiny. So I see myself as an adult. If I had seen her, I would have been like, "Nah." So, so yeah, I think I forgot the question that I was answering is
Well, I
what.
love the tangent you were going on, which was really around all of it. Well, because it was about self-esteem versus self-worth, and then that whole journey to me related to body image and diet
Yeah.
culture. And, we're in this like interesting stew, I feel like, of complexity of being human in this world because
Yeah.
there's a lot. It's like, because it is to me, worth is the same way. It's like your inherent value. And then your self-esteem is like, how confident can you feel? How can you like present yourself in the world? What are the things that you're doing? Do you have the self-esteem to go after something you've never experienced or accomplished before? And I would argue, though, that when your worth is really high, your self esteem can then naturally be attached to that. Like you can do those things. But if you're doing things with self esteem, but you don't have self worth, it's going to be kind of an empty situation. You're just kind of forcing it or faking it to make it worth. And they actually, you really need both on
Yeah.
some level, right? To get the things you want done in the world.
Yeah. Well, and I almost feel like if the worth part isn't there and you're chasing it through accomplishment, what happens when you get there?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's really then you get that sort of like, is this all there is? That
Mhm.
right? And yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, even in the conversation we're having, sometimes what I see is like, that your worth is tied to that number on the scale. Like it's tied to how, like what size clothing you're wearing or
Hmm.
any of those pieces. And then starting to separate that is really important. Like my worth and value has nothing to do with what I look like. And it can be challenging for like that's sort of like the crux of probably what you work with people on then is like how do you start to really see yourself independent of that? And then when you're independent of that, now you can start to say, okay, like we have some goals to pursue and it's okay. And like let's pursue those from an empowered place.
Yeah. Actually, I do remember where I was going with it. So,
Yeah.
if you believe that you have control over the size and shape of your body, then if you're tying esteem with worth, then if you're not able to accomplish that, now you've taken away from your worth
Mm.
because you actually believe that you have control. We we have control over the conditions that we create. So through habits, through even through weight loss programs. I'm not a fan of weight loss programs and diets because I actually think it feeds into that belief of not enough. That
Mhm.
it's the promised land is that number or whatever the size. Um, Whereas habits, if you're doing it every day, you're coming from a place of intention, of value, of prioritizing, right? What you think is important. So you're living the life that you want to be living and not waiting, not putting your life on hold. Um, so I think I lost my train of thought again. But I really, actually, when you look at that sort of, we need to, I can't think of, I really have lost my train of thought.
It's okay. Well, we can do a little quick pause. Well, what you were saying is you were talking about how if we are tying our value and our worth to what we look like, then that's just going to cause its own issues in our lives, right? And
Yeah.
then there's like this level of self-esteem that you were going with.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we just want to be very careful that
Hmm.
we're not making it so that the size and shape of our body has anything to do with our worth.
Mhm.
And and the flip side of that, by the way, or flip side might be not be the right word, but the guilt and the shame that goes along with not doing it,
Mhm.
to not being, if you believe like, oh, this outcome is something I have control over, and I don't do it, what kind of how do you feel about yourself then? What are you making that mean about yourself? So I think we
Right.
can't talk about the worth part without talking about the guilt and the shame.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. I always like to it's been a long journey, I feel like, for myself, and I'm always trying to I don't know if you know this, but I wrote a fitness column for many years, and so, like, movement and fitness, and I have a book I have all my books are about movement, yoga and movement. And and I would say for me, it's still always a struggle because like I move constantly. Like I walk all the time. I do tap, I do yoga, I weight lift, like I do all this stuff. And then still separating my worth and value from what my body looks like or how much I weigh. It's like an interesting tug of war all the time because we're just so ingrained in that diet culture, like those pieces we talked about. And even though I don't actually feel like I associate my worth and value with that number, it still is hard for me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? You know, like that's
Yeah.
and it's an interesting thing because like if you looked at any measure of my life, I live a very healthy life. Like I don't drink caffeine, I sleep 8 hours every night. I take care of myself, I move my body constantly. And then but there's still this thing, it's like and it is that diet culture pull, like you see images or it's like what do you want to look like and all of that. And that's the thing I think it's always just interesting as people who are sharing about this and still always on that journey ourselves, like unpacking like
Yeah.
what is it that still keeps driving that feeling of like, "Ugh, okay, like I have to keep releasing that one over and over again."
Yeah. Yeah. Or just I think in terms of, can I think of a different way to say it to myself that's
Mhm.
more empowering? So it's not to say that the way you're saying it to yourself isn't necessarily true, but it's not helpful.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so can we find a different way to speak to ourselves uh, in a way where, oh, okay, like I'm good. Like those, it's not the same thing. I I had a coach say to me, and I think it was really powerful. It's the whole love is about who you are, approval, validation, all of it. Because I think it comes through. It is about the external validation we look at, and there's it's a double-edged sword, right? You get compliments on, oh, you lost weight, or you got strong, or whatever it is about our appearance. I mean, the classic is the whole, oh, you look good today. And you're like, well, don't I look good every day? But when we place too much focus on that, we get ourselves in trouble, right? So we just want to be really careful that we're not doing that.
Yeah, well, and what you were saying too about like the guilt and the shame, which is like super common, I think, for so many women around this, like what feeling bad about it. And like that's the hard part. Cause then you're like, oh, like, okay, is that helpful? And it's just such a good question for any of you out there who are doing this is like, am I saying something that is actually helpful to me? Or is this actually making me feel worse about myself?
Yeah. And like, what would your best friend say to you? How would you say it to a best friend in a way that would be kind and
Mhm,
supportive and truly from this place of like, I only want what's best for you. Like, I
mhm,
really, if you saw someone who was, um, let's say, overweight, and it really is about like, I worry about your health. One, let's find out, how healthy are you? Like, let's let it really is the like, if I could unzip you and look at you on the inside, what are we doing? And can we take better care? So in my program, I'm always talking about the fundamental five. And this is, so when I talk about habits, I'm talking about getting enough quality sleep. So 7 to 9 hours of sleep. Every person's body's a little different, so there's always the range. Staying hydrated, so drinking enough water. I usually say half your body weight in ounces of water. So if you weigh 200 pounds, we're talking about 100 ounces. It's a lot of water, actually, but it doesn't have to all come from drinking water. Like the foods we eat can have a lot of water content and stuff like that. There's other ways to keep track of it. This is just kind of a guideline, if you will. 30 minutes of mindful movement. So, again, these are all fundamental. That's not to say there aren't other habits we want to create, but we want to start there. I say 5 servings of fruits and vegetables a day with the goal of like 3 vegetables to 2 fruit. So we get all the colors of the rainbow, green leafy vegetables. And then the fifth one is to eat until you're comfortably full. So, this, like when you talk about intuition, I talk in terms of like learning how to listen to your body and honor it, trust that it knows. And it does require awareness and it requires attunement and then it requires alignment. As in, like, okay, now that you understand that you're hungry, what are you going to do? Are you going to ignore it until you're hangry or are you going to eat something now
mhm,
to take care of it?
mhm.
So, yeah, so I'm always coming from this place of like, how are we taking care of ourselves and having that baseline so that even physiologically we're not in a state of scarcity so that we can make better choices for ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when
And
that physiological part is really important, I think sometimes we underestimate how much that stress and that anxiety and that harsh inner voice and inner critic are keeping us from actually the things that we really want. And we think that like again, like that feeling of control is going to somehow give us like the weight loss or, feeling better about ourselves. And really that actually prevents it because it keeps our body so stressed out.
yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Stress, just that's a whole nother topic in terms of when you talk about your body wanting to hold on to the weight, when we're under especially chronic stress.
Yeah.
That's we're actually raising our sort of natural set point for our weight. So there's a lot of power in being able to even reframe that, right? So, like we talk about the stress response, a more nuanced conversation would be to understand that there's a threat response and a challenge response that are both types of stress responses. So, I think in the literature, it's like eustress versus distress. And eustress is short lived. Eustress is that, when athletes talk about being in the zone, right? That flow state where you're challenging yourself and you're seeing yourself actually accomplish things that you set out to do. Those are good stress. That's growth. That makes us stronger, more resilient. It's that chronic stress where you're coming from this place of I and I don't have access to the resources, to the time, whatever it is that I need, and we're like marinating in it, right? We ruminate, we worry, we're not present, all of that stuff. That if we catch ourselves, there are things we can do to help, sort of activate the parasympathetic nervous system. So that
Mhm.
calm, I mean, you know this from yoga, right? That
Mhm.
sympathetic is all about like fight or flight. Parasympathetic is when we're calming. stretching, deep breathing, yoga, all of those things can really help to activate that system,
Mhm.
bring down the cortisol levels.
Yeah, I remember I can't remember where I learned that, but it was really powerful for me to realize that too, because sometimes it's just like that stress and intensity, and it can even be in the way that you're working out when you're constantly activating your system all the time and your nervous system never gets to relax. It's like it just your body hangs on to things because it doesn't it's like it's not safe and it just is gonna hang on to it through that stress, the hormones.
Yeah, yeah. So we can we can help ourselves there too, right?
Mhm.
If we get enough sleep, because not getting enough sleep puts our body under stress as well.
Mm,
So yeah, it'd be interesting to see what all our natural set points would be if we were like in that optimal state of stress. Like given all the stuff that you're saying you're doing, it would be interesting to figure out like is your body holding on to weight
mm,
because of that? Or is there other stuff? Like some folks talk about gut health. I'm not
mhm.
an expert in that, but it would be interesting to there are just things to explore and
Yeah,
see like how can I be healthier? And am I at my optimal weight? Like maybe this right now is my body and its wisdom saying, given everything that's going on, this is optimal for you right now.
yeah. Totally. Well, what I love in this conversation, Amy, is like we're just unpacking all the different things that there are always for us to consider and to grow into. And for anybody, if you're feeling stressed about it, it's not to be stressed. It's more for us to say, oh, like that's interesting. That's like something to consider. Like some of my clients recently, we've been talking a lot about caffeine. And
Mm,
we've been talking a lot about how that additional caffeine in the afternoon is really affecting them and impacting them. And I'm like, oh, like that's cool. Like to me, I'm like, okay, great. Like let's be curious about caffeine. We don't have to make it bad and we don't have to
mhm.
quit it, but we can just say, okay, maybe it's affecting me in a way that's really affecting my sleep or what I'm doing. And that conversation can then elicit the change that's going to support you rather than any kind of like guilt or shame around it. And then each time you just like, oh, okay, like now I get to learn something new that's going to help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what would you say would be the first thing for anybody to do? And you gave us a lot of really great tips actually in this podcast. But what would you say if somebody is like in that conversation around like diet culture and their body and their challenge, they're feeling challenged around that? What would you say is like the number one thing you'd have them start doing?
I think it would be to if when you notice the thought. So I have like a four-step reframing method that I use. I think pranayama and yoga very
Mhm.
similar, where you notice the thought, right? You shine a light on it, and so I think a lot of these thoughts we're talking about that are operating are under the surface. They're subconscious ones, but there's some in psychology it's called like core beliefs, right? That where you're coming from this feeling of I'm not good enough. And what does that mean? So there's an interpretation that we want to challenge. So it's starts with awareness. So notice it, name it, really shine a light on it. So journaling really helps with that. I want you, if you can, to become an observer of your thoughts. So by writing it down, you've put some distance between you and the thought. And there's a quote like you are not your thoughts. Recognizing that so that you're looking at these thoughts and then like try to separate fact from opinion or belief. And belief is just we're accepting it as true doesn't mean it's actually true. So if we can do that and then do the challenge the premise, right? Like, is this true? Okay. If it isn't, how do I reframe it? If it is true, how do I reframe it to serve me? And if, but it's the practice of noticing. It's the same thing with emotions. A lot of, so a lot of times what happens is you notice how you're feeling. And if you can even take a pause there and then go back and, okay, where's this feeling coming from? what what are the thoughts, what are the beliefs, right? And then the interpretation, what am I making
Mhm.
it mean,
Mhm.
and what am I making it mean about me? I think that's really where a lot of that the empowerment comes from is when you can recognize, oh, and there's a difference between judgment and discernment. So judgment is about good and bad, shouldn't, right? It's all that.
Mhm.
That's where shame and guilt come from. You did something you weren't supposed to do, right? You did something wrong. Discernment is literally that whole like, would this be better? Would this serve me better? Right? Like it's looking at the bigger picture in terms
Mhm.
of where you want your life to go.
Mhm.
And I think discernment is empowering.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, those are so helpful for people who are just beginning that journey. Like, how do you start to really have a powerful relationship with yourself so that you can have those things that you really want? So, so helpful, Amy. So, I also have some rapid fire questions for you. Are you up for that?
Okay. Let's see if I lose my train of thought there.
You won't. You'll be great. So, what's on your nightstand?
What's on my nightstand? Um, a light, my iPhone charger, a little jar of Vaseline, a glass of water.
Perfect. I love it. Simple. Yeah. What was the last thing you watched on TV?
The TV show Elementary.
Elementary, is it good?
I like it. They're all reruns now.
Oh, okay.
It's Elementary is with it's about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, but
Yeah.
it's with Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu.
Oh, fun. Yeah,
So
I feel like I've seen maybe an episode of that. So fun. Awesome. And then when was the last time you tried something new and what was it?
something new. Well, I'm taking tennis lessons, and so my coach is working on my serve. And so pretty much every time we meet, he's introducing something new because I didn't know how to serve. So he
That's huge. I'm a former tennis player myself. So yeah, that's huge to learn a new serve. That's big.
and it's
Awesome.
really interesting that whole sort of like the cognitive load of when you're first I love the game of tennis in terms of the learning process because it's a constant reminder. In some respects it's unlearning the things that I was taught. It's the whole like being present and like, okay, you missed that ball, let's keep going. Like that's
Totally.
behind you. And the goal is to get better. It's not to be perfect. There's so many messages in tennis that are lovely reminders.
That's
So,
awesome. Such a great metaphor for life, right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And then the last one are the what are the top 3 most used emojis on your phone?
The top 3. I don't know. Let me look at my phone.
Yeah. Look it up. Sometimes people need to see it.
The top 3 emojis I have are smiley face with a hug, and then smiley face with the 3 hearts,
Mm,
and then smiley face with the kiss.
okay. You're a big smiley face person. I love it. It's awesome. Well,
And the 4th
Amy,
one is a birthday.
a birthday one. That's awesome. Well, Amy, it's such a delight to have you on the podcast. We have all the ways of reaching out and getting to know Amy are in the show notes. You can reach out to her there and learn from her around habits, around diet culture, and really like empowering yourself to the next level of your life. And so, Amy, I'm so grateful to have you on School of Self Worth. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a delight.